Ladies and gentle gamers, we are so back. Let's get the ketchup out of the way. New chapters, exquisite. Lore drops, unhinged. Game structure, dynamited. Long-nosed TV man, I laughed. Short-horn goat boy, I cried. Mostly I screamed though. Smells like shrimp emotions and splattered grey matter. Ice me up, boss. Rules card more like fucks hard. Here comes the grub. Asgore is really going to do it this time. With the vinegary dregs of the Chapter 2 theory scene behind us and great vistas of pristine, untouched lore stretching to the horizon ahead, the first question to answer is where to even start. We have an almost but not quite confirmed ID for the Roaring Night. We have an ominous, unrevealed twist at the end of the prophecy. We have foreshadowing for Chapter 5. We have an emerging dichotomy between the angel and a previously unmentioned tale of hell. We have whisperings of an eldritch encounter in the forest. We have a weird Glorbo who lives in a game within a game within a game facsimile of the shelter. We have baffling parallels between shadow crystals, rainwater, and a fallen star. We have whatever the fuck is going on with the Eggman. As an entry point though, one topic stands above the crowd, at a perfect intersection of tangibility and confusion. Something that feels within our reach to decode with the information available, yet which is still complex enough to fly over a player's head without dedicated analysis, and is so central to Deltarune's plot that trying to further interpret the game without first solidifying this foundation is a recipe for disaster. Despite the long-awaited reveal of the Roaring Night, it was also revealed to not be the game's antagonist. It's just one of them. Welcome, Delta gamers, to my analysis of the Roaring Night's faction politics. This is a conspiracy theory. Everyone, welcome to the Akasateshquo Jokzi Memorial Conspiracy Corkboard 34 million. Unlike some previous diagrams of mine, there's not actually much to explain here. It's a conspiracy board, and the strings show connections between characters. Not just any connections though, I tried making that corkboard but gave up when I started seeing amygdalas outside my window. This bad boy is a bit more focused. Every connection via solid color string represents collusion, characters sharing knowledge, working together, or otherwise being mutually in on something. I've also included a couple striped strings to represent more general connections where it's relevant to the discussion. Now, before we start, I want to get something out of the way. I have very limited time to make this video, and to keep this train on the rails, I need to be able to operate under some ground level assumptions without spending an hour justifying them. What am I getting at? Mainly, that I think the night is Des. If you've been following the debate around this topic, it's not for any reasons you haven't heard already. Antlers, raising of bats, vibes, logistics, and a bunch of other smaller shit. I think Des died is the popular conclusion anyway, and in my mind it's not really even a close race, but I thought it was best to state up front and point out that weirdly not much of my analysis even breaks if Carol's the night instead. They're working together anyway, so the outcome is similar. Now, is it just me, or is this intro... Let's kick things off with a classic. Chris Streamer. Hey guys, remember Chapter 2?
Oh, why did Chris make the Snowgrave fountain? Is Chris bad for slashing their mom's tires? What if they actually don't have to be souls? Oh, maybe Chris likes being controlled by the soul because it helps them make friends.
How's the view from 2021, Grand Uncle? This kid's an entrepreneur now. They'll throw your ass in the garbage can, then slink off screen to drink chalky milk and teleconference with the O5 Council. They will not be consulting you for timetable conflicts, and they will make random dog noises because they're just that kind of freak. If the Chapter 4 sequence in Noelle's house made one thing shadow crystal clear, it's that not only is Chris their own whole-ass person, they're a person who sees us as nothing more than a particularly unwieldy tool, to be kept in the dark, constrained, and bent to serve their agenda just as much as we bend them to serve ours. It's a truly beautiful, blisteringly toxic relationship that will definitely end in tears. I can't wait. If the new chapters made two things clear though, it's also that the reason Chris made this dark fountain we spent 4 years speculating about isn't because they are the Knight, it's because they work for them. As the world's most non-committal Chris Knight defender, I give myself half a point. How do we know this? Well, let's start with Tenna. Several times in Chapter 3, we hear Tenna monologue about a bargain he struck with the Knight. Keep the Lightners busy in exchange for viewership. This is pretty standard chapter antagonist bullshit, but what sets Tenna apart is a small but crucial bit of additional context. According to this hidden conversation in the backstage video game, Tenna's deal with the Knight was also a deal with Chris. It's important to note here that Tenna is not conflating Chris and the Knight as being the same person. He complains earlier about how long the Knight's taken to arrive, despite Chris already having sat through a full round of his game show. Instead, what I think this must imply is that Chris was the one who conveyed the terms of the deal to Tenna on the Knight's behalf, likely back in Chapter 2 when the fountain was still forming, or even between Chapters 1 and 2 when Chris plugged him in the first place, since Tenna seems perfectly aware of events that transpire around his Lightworld counterpart. This explains Tenna's leeriness around Chris, and also how Tenna starts the chapter already under the Knight's thumb, despite the Knight themselves not showing up in the Dark World until literal hours later. Kindly now direct your gaze toward Exhibit B. Starting at the end of Chapter 3 and continuing throughout Chapter 4, a clear pattern emerges from the interactions between Chris and the Knight. Neither of them actually want to fight each other. During the final boss fight in Chapter 3, Chris's damage against the Knight is drastically nerfed until the friends are badly wounded, and even if you do win the fight and force the Knight to knock Susie and Rousey into next week using lose in the cutscene jutsu, as soon as they're unconscious, Chris just peacefully kneels down and pantomimes injury like a World Cup footballer. Even more tellingly, if you actually manage to chase the Knight down to the top of the stairs in Chapter 4, Chris just stands there, refusing to attack even as Susie shouts up at them in bewilderment. That's not all. Later in Chapter 4, when Rousey asks you to close your eyes and watch a cutscene with Susie and Gerson, you can instead choose to close your eyes and think about the Knight, at which point Chris will visualize the Knight taking off their helmet, only to signal jam the reveal at the last second by thinking of Jockington before opening their eyes to cut you off entirely. The fact that Chris feels the need to actively block you here suggests that their memories were indeed liable to reveal something about the Knight's true identity to us. Chris, you think you don't already know. As a final dollop of whipped cream atop the pie slice, Chris refuses to open this big conspicuous door in the back of the freshly undark-worldified church. Does this mean the Knight was for sure hiding behind it? No. Does it mean Chris thought there might be something behind the door worth hiding? Yes, and as for things to hide, the Knight is the most obvious candidate. This about wraps up our first phase of analysis, direct acts of collaboration between Chris and the capital R Roaring Knight. But if you thought this rabbit hole bottomed out at 2 conspirators, you, like all of us, were underestimating the true batshittery of Deltarune's faction politics. Does anyone hear a phone ringing? Alright, strap in. I was hoping to avoid tangents, but before going even a step further, we need to nail down one tiny little point. Who was phone? Here's what we got to work with. On the normal route, Chris tears out the player's soul and sneaks off to the kitchen to take a clandestine phone call. We can only hear the conversation partially, but the caller emphasizes keeping Susie away from Dessa's guitar. While this call is in progress, we can eavesdrop on Asgore in the bathroom, ruling him out as a participant. Later, after failing to hide the guitar from Susie, Chris makes a second call to report the emergency, prompting the voice to reply, "I'll be right there." Cut to living room. Noelle and Susie do some gay shit, but are interrupted by Asgore, and then, only moments later, Mayor Carol Halloween Holiday herself, catching Noelle off guard by inexplicably returning home from work hours earlier than expected. Between the candidates of Asgore, who wasn't part of the first call where the need to keep Susie away from the guitar was established, and who already voiced his intent to go down for snacks before even realizing that Chris and Susie were in the house, and Carol, who dives for that guitar like a bloodhound and otherwise has no reason to come back from work early, it's quite a clear-cut conclusion that the caller is not Asgore. What about a third party who's neither Asgore nor Carol, maybe even the Roaring Knight? In that case, why does Carol come home from work? What if the Knight told Carol to come home? In that case, why does the Knight say, "I'll be right there," instead of "Carol will," or just omit the pronoun with ellipses like the other phone calls do all the time already? Okay, but the weird route though. Carol still comes home early despite us never seeing Chris make any phone call. Good point, but even though we don't see a phone call, Chris still clears their call history afterward just like on the normal route, implying they still did call someone, perhaps sometime during this gigantic black screen time skip in which we know they ripped out the soul anyway. Because if they didn't call Carol back from work, who the fuck were they calling in the normal route, and why the fuck did they coincidentally not show up at the same time that Carol coincidentally did? Why does Carol sound different at the end of the weird route? I don't fucking know. Anyway, I'm gonna go with the voice on the phone call being Carol. Now, back to the corkboard. Literally everything I just talked about regarding the phone is summarized in this one tiny bullet. When it comes to Carol's involvement in the Knight conspiracy though, that's just the beginning. As someone who never took a single humanities course after leaving high school, here's a pro-literary analysis tip. If an author writes a word in all caps and bright red text like a Sans remembers your genocide meme, they might be trying to tell you something. What this tells me is that Carol knows about Chris's soul, and is indirectly addressing us, the players, with her statement here. This lines up both with her comments on the phone and also her frankly concerning obsession with red heart-shaped objects. Carol welcoming the soul into her home despite ordering Chris to spend the last half hour beating the shit out of us with a hockey stick paints an interesting picture for view of us. Something reverent but possessive, some cuckoo and the Gollum shit, if you know what I mean. So far we've discussed links between Chris and the Knight and between Carol and Chris, but nothing tying the Knight to Carol personally. I do, however, think there is at least one. The black katana Carol keeps in her bedroom, and which can only be fully seen after modifying the game to remove the superimposed darkness. We hear Asgore talking to himself in the bathroom about how he needs to go look again, and the next we see him, he's standing directly in front of this katana delivering a soliloquy to a nearby plant, as he tends to do. The contents of this speech are deeply mysterious in their own right, but what matters for Carol is what he says at the end.
"It's beautiful, isn't it? This black shard."
Now, am I crazy to think that after moving to this room specifically to look at something, parking himself directly in front of a conspicuous black katana, and then marveling aloud at the beauty of an otherwise unspecified black shard, that the katana itself is the black shard to which Asgore is referring? Our only knowledge of black shards comes from the one that Susie can break off of the knight's knife in Chapter 3, which is described as dagger-like and can be wielded by Chris as a sword. Considering the knight's weapon can shapeshift anyway, I don't find it that hard to imagine them breaking off a larger shard in the shape of a katana, either as a gift to a loyal ally or as the result of a past samurai duel. I'll leave the particulars to fanfic writers, but my general takeaway is that possession of this black shard katana is a strong indication of familiarity, if not allegiance, between the mayor and the knight. Speaking of Asgore though, I think it's time we address him directly. The extent of Asgore's involvement in the conspiracy is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult parts of Chapter 4 to unpack. The conspiracy corkboard in his basement and the remarks of the townsfolk imply that the collapse of his life was tied to a case he failed to crack as police chief, but was unable to move on from, descending into conspiratorial obsession and alienating his friends and family. As in Chapter 2, I'd say the safe bet is still on that case being Des's disappearance, an event we can assume was so strange and supernatural that Asgore had no way to come forward with the truth even if he uncovered it. And the fact that he's even aware of the term Black Shard is a pretty strong hint that he knows something. Despite his insider knowledge though, and despite his access to Carol's bedroom implying some level of shared confidence between the two, I don't think that Asgore is working directly with Carol and the Knight in the same way that Chris is, for two main reasons. One, he wasn't invited to the secret villain phone call, and two, I don't believe for a second that Asgore put up with Chris being in the situation that they're in. Although Asgore often isn't the best at knowing what his family actually wants or how to make them happy, there's never been anything insincere about his good intentions. Ever since Undertale, Asgore's love for his family has been his overriding motivation, and I don't think there's any amount of leverage that would convince him to knowingly put Chris in harm's way. This of course begs the question of why Carol keeps Asgore around at all if he can't be privy to the full conspiracy. Maybe she wants to keep him on a leash to stop him blowing her cover, or maybe Asgore's skills as an investigator actually do provide some meaningful benefit to the conspiracy, even if Carol has to keep him partially in the dark. In any case, I think most of the details of Asgore's story are being saved for reveals in Chapter 5, so until then, it's probably best to leave him on the back burner. Okay, let's recap. So far we've established a solid inner circle to the conspiracy, consisting of Chris, Carol, and the Roaring Knight, a sort of Cromwellian anti-fun gang, if you will. Tenna falls in line with King and Queen as straightforward and largely oblivious pawns of the Knight, and we also have Asgore in a more ambiguous peripheral role, close enough to think he's on the team, but, like in other areas of his life, probably not actually on it. What we haven't established is what the conspiracy actually does, and that's for good reason. It's actually really fucking hard to tell. In Chapters 1 and 2, the Knight didn't even bother showing up, so who knows what the goal was with those fountains. In Chapter 4, it quite literally hovers in the air and aura farms for the duration of the Dark World's existence after a quick trip into Gerson's study to drop off a shadow crystal. Seriously, it runs from the Lighteners when it's encountered and tries to keep them back, but we never actually interrupt it doing anything. It's playing a completely passive role, and only even summons the Titan after waiting for the heroes to catch up to it. If it really was looking for Toriel, then it's doing a pretty half-hearted job in my opinion. As for Chapter 3, I might need to rant for a sec. Okay, so you're the Knight, right? And you want to kidnap Toriel. And it can't be in the light world. For some reason, you need Toriel to be in a dark world to kidnap her. So what do? Well, naturally, you're going to want to get Chris, your standing operative, to make a dark fountain in her house while she's asleep, then swoop in and nap her. Free and easy, simple and clean. But what do we see when Chris actually makes the dark world? The Knight doing its fucking groceries off screen for 5 straight hours while Tenna spins the plot of the entire chapter out of stalling for time until they show up. Toriel is literally right there, next to the door, unconscious, packaged up like a takeout box waiting for its skip the dishes driver. The Lighteners are on the other side of the world, completely unaware of her presence and embroiled in a game of fucking Guitar Hero, and will remain in that state for hours. Tenna did literally such a good job. Where is the Knight? Well, apparently you're waiting for the fun gang to remove themselves from Tenna's distraction and find Toriel, so then you can swoop in and immediately have to fight them for her. What the fuck are you doing? Oops, surprise, you wasted so much time that Undyne, who was also in the store with you buying groceries for 5 hours, has shown up too, because Chris, for some reason, followed a precisely calculated series of steps before creating the fountain to ensure the police would come to investigate. Did you want them to do that? Apparently so, because the instant the pork sushi is served, you immediately forget about Toriel, who you just ostensibly finished dueling the 3 heroes of prophecy to the death to get to, and is now completely defenseless, and beeline it to scoop up Undyne, who has just entered the Dark Fountain, and take her back out of the Dark Fountain into the Light World, through the town streets, and into a second Dark Fountain in the bunker. Do you go back for Toriel afterward? Nope. Was Undyne such a threat that you had to abort the plan? Apparently not, because you overpower her easily. Was the true target Undyne all along, and you just wanted to lure her into a dark world to incapacitate her with your crazy darkness magic? That actually makes a lot more sense. Undyne's supposed to be really strong in the light world, and maybe you're not. It also partially explains the gigantic delay before you arrive. It just leaves one tiny little question then of why, once Undyne was in the dark world at your mercy, you didn't actually bother doing the incapacitating part. She was alive and kicking right up until you flew her out of the fountain. If the big issue was that she's stronger than you in the light world, then what do you think's gonna happen once you pop out of Toriel's house and commence dragging the angry and presumably strapped police chief across town to the bunker? So yeah, it's a bit confusing. For now though, I want to see what we can say about the Knight's conspiracy without explaining any of that shit, or throwing darts at the broad scope motivation. And the only starting point for that is the shelter. The Knight's single most impactful move so far in the story is abducting Undyne and taking her into the shelter. This tells us two things immediately. One, the Knight has access to the shelter, and two, there is a dark world inside it. Immediately following this, we get a mysterious cutscene of Chris lingering outside the entrance, and then the door cracking open for them, seemingly from the inside. Although the game cuts to black right afterward, this gives us one more important puzzle piece. The Knight and their allies are using the shelter as some sort of base of operations. What are they doing in there? We only have one real hint. On the phone call in Chapter 4, Carol drops the ominous phrase,
"Police sacrifice next week."
Damn, Carol says all cops are bunkered, am I right? Now, is it possible that this is a garbled and out-of-context fragment of a different sentence that means something completely unrelated? Yes, but I think it's a bit early to start throwing out information arbitrarily under the assumption that Tricky Tony is trying to mislead us, and it kinda sounds like they're sacrificing cops in a bunker. Why are they doing that? Absolutely no clue. Despite the shelter's purpose being a dead end, though, we can still use the fact that it has 3 access codes to cast suspicion of complicity on various townsfolk. Starting with the obvious, the Pine Tree code belongs to the mayor, who we already know is involved. Undyne is implied to know the police badge code, but contrary to Susie's reasoning, I strongly doubt that was a reason for her kidnapping, considering the Knight is keeping her in the shelter that you need the code to access in the first place. A much more likely candidate is Asgore, as ex-chief of police and current crony of Carol Holiday. That leaves us with the Deltarune code, which, following the pattern of shelter codes being trusted to powerful figures in the hometown community, I think we can assume leads us to the church, or more specifically, Alvin. Father Alvin, like Asgore, is fairly hard to place in the grand scheme of this conspiracy. He's most likely the guardian of a shelter code and gives Chris a pretty stern warning not to investigate it, although if he does have knowledge of what's going on there, it either means he's not deep enough to realize that Chris is part of the crew, or that he's in so deep that he knows to maintain kayfabe around Chris while they're possessed by the player's soul. By far the most conspicuous link between Father Alvin and the Knight, though, is the fact that he keeps his dad's corpse in a fucking desk drawer. Deltarune more or less bends over backward to make sure we realize this is not normal behavior. The newly accessible book in the Chapter 4 library confirms that monster funeral practices from Undertale have carried over largely unchanged, except for the additional caveat that the monster's dust and symbolic item are now buried afterward. This is new lore, not specified in Undertale. Lining up with this, in Chapter 1 Alvin tells us to our face that a hammer is buried under Gerson's tombstone. Susie reiterates this again after finding Gerson's remains in Alvin's desk and wonders aloud why the hell he has this. This is not a Grandma Egbert's urn situation, this is a dead body. The absolute only reason Alvin would have this in his desk is if he intended it to be resurrected in a dark fountain. This implies at least basic knowledge of dark worlds on Alvin's part, but the real link to the Knight comes from the fact that Gerson, after indeed being resurrected, seems to have been personally delivered Shadow Crystal. The topic of whether or not Shadow Crystals originate from the Knight is actually really weird and complicated, and I don't want to focus on it now, but the fact that one ends up inside Gerson's desk, coupled with his claim that the Knight personally came into his study before fleeing again, and that someone really wanted him to use it, paints a picture of the Knight dropping this one off with a pretty pointed agenda. And if Gerson using the Shadow Crystal was for some reason part of the Knight's plan, then of course Gerson existing would also be part of that plan, which brings us back to Alvin and his weird jar of dad dust. Beyond that though, I really don't know what to make of their relationship. If Alvin was part of the plan to resurrect Gerson, why wasn't he in the Dark World to meet his father again? The guy's one character trait is daddy issues, you can't tell me he wouldn't want that. All I can think is that, like Asgore, Alvin is being kept in the dark by the conspiracy's inner circle, or fuck, maybe he got kidnapped at the end of Chapter 4 and no one's noticed yet. One related point that I'm tacking onto the script now that I've thought of it is that another major emphasis of the Holiday residents' phone call was the importance of Chris bringing the player's soul into the church Dark World. The soul seems pretty important for a lot of reasons, so why specifically nag about it here? Well, maybe it's something to do with the apocalyptic avatar of darkness the Knight was planning on summoning, which could only be defeated by the soul's fountain sealing light. To be clear, I still have no fucking idea why the Knight wanted to make the Titan in the first place if its only purpose was to be immediately vanquished by the heroes, but considering the alternative is implied to be the end of the world, which the Knight could have achieved hundreds of times over by now if it actually wanted, I think we have to assume that staging the Titan's defeat was indeed the plan. And, wrapping back around, if the Knight needed to make sure the Titan was a surmountable obstacle for Chris in the game, what was the one other factor they needed to win the fight? Yep, Gerson again. To be honest, this is starting to edge into Palpatine meets Homestuck levels of Machiavellian future sight scheming that I'm not totally on board with, but if we're looking for motives that would tie resurrecting Gerson into the Knight's plan, I can't deny this is a factor. And with that, we've wrapped up just about all the main players on the board. We can tack Alvin onto the team in a similar, ambiguously peripheral role to Asgore, in some ways potentially deeper into the conspiracy because of his ties to the Chapter 4 Dark World, and in other ways more distant because of his lack of personal connection to Carol, and, to be brutally honest, even general relevance to the story outside of his own self-contained arc. Even now though, with the well of evidence starting to run dry, it doesn't feel like my job here is totally done. Huh. Aren't we forgetting something? So, I said at the start this wouldn't turn into a Death Knight video, and it's not going to, in the sense that I won't be plotting through the evidence for and against. But, if I had to cast my vote for the single juiciest, puzzlingest, most enticingly lore-packed line of text across both of these new chapters, here it is, the chorus of Raise Your Bat.
Because I'm with you in the dark, with your heart as my mark, which will shine you the way through the waves.
To understand why these lyrics fuck me up so bad, consider that Raise Your Bat is a comprehensively Death-themed song. It kinda leads into the segment where you play it with the first major info dump about Death we've gotten in the whole game, highlighting her association with rock music, which is further cemented by her room in Chapter 4. The title and lyrics also center around baseball bat imagery, which, from Noelle's anecdotes and the contents of the holiday residence, is a symbol exclusively associated with Death. I don't want to say this is literally a song that Death wrote before going missing, considering the density of prescient metaphysical innuendo in the lyrics, but regardless of its origin, it's clearly sung from her perspective. So, when the chorus goes and drops, "I'm with you in the dark, with your heart as my mark," I honestly think this is pretty direct confirmation that Death is the reason Chris is possessed by the player soul. Remember that mysterious interruption by a second voice in the intro that everyone is arguing about for years? Let's not get distracted though, I don't think we have the tools to unpack the specifics of the how and why yet. The real intrigue of this line, to me, is that it ties Death to the heart of the Night Conspiracy, and by extension the main plot of Deltarune itself, completely independently of any other evidence for Death actually being the Night. And once again, I do think she is the Night, but even if she somehow isn't, and none of the Roaring Knight's actions can be tied directly back to her, this thread doesn't break. She's still with us in the dark, our heart is still her mark. And recall from earlier that this particular heart is a pretty big deal to the conspiracy's scheme, whatever the fuck that actually is, considering Chris at minimum needs it to seal fountains and fight titans. That's also the whole reason Chris even counts as a hero of prophecy in the first place. Without Death's influence, whatever the conspiracy's planning doesn't even make it off the runway. The thing that confuses me though, and that will likely continue to confuse me until the release of Chapter 5, is where this premise leaves us with the idea of Death as the Lost Girl, the findher.org voice in the code mystery box character. If Death has this level of agency in the plot, and especially if she's actively flying around and chewing the scenery as a god of hyperdeath adjacent Titan OC, in what sense is she still lost, and what would it actually mean to find her? Maybe it's just my Deltarune boomer brain coming down from 4 years of interpretations where Death was some sort of endgame creepypasta reveal, but it's not like the game has entirely dropped this thread either. We still have Carol coercing Chris with a mysterious promise from before the story. We still have building insinuations of some eldritch trauma lurking in Chris's past, repressed memories of children lost in the forest, following a pointed tale that should not be followed. We have Asgore still working the case after all these years, we have the voice in the code back and more verbose than ever, speaking of a nightmare where they walk into darkness and a door slams shut behind them. We have a code for the shelter, hidden in Death's guitar. We might not be able to say for now what it means for Death to have gone missing, or even what it means for her to be the Night, in the same way that knowing Flowey is Asriel doesn't tell you the important part about how to get from one to the other. What I am willing to guess, though, is that whatever weird event led to Death's disappearance, and specifically Chris's involvement in that event, lie at the root of the conspiracy we see unfolding now. Maybe the roots, even. From Death's brush with the frayed edges of her reality came the soul, and from the soul came Chris's role in the prophecy and significance to Carol. For Chris to be marked in this way by Death and willingly promise their cooperation to her mother in whatever dubious mission they're undertaking suggests a level of perceived responsibility for whatever happened, or at least a proximity that left them with too much knowledge to back out. Speaking of though, it's about time that I turned back myself. Believe me when I say that I could go deeper into speculation here. I've barely scratched the surface of all the cryptic bullshit in these new chapters, but in doing so I'd quickly find myself writing the scripts of about 3 new videos. Do I want to make 3 new videos? Fuck yes, but here's the thing. Before that, I have my own game to finish first. It's called Random Access Mayhem. It's kind of a take on a 2D ultra kill roguelike where you swap bodies. I post devlogs about it on the channel sometimes. The reason you're seeing this video so promptly after Deltarune's launch, relative to my usual pace anyway, is because I could only afford to take 1 month off to make it. I am very tired. So here's the plan. I'm gonna go quiet again for 3 or so months to get RAM at early access, and once it's out, I'll loop back around and put some time into covering Deltarune again. Talking longer term than that, my own future's a bit of an uncertain haze right now, but I can say at least that playing these new chapters went a long way to remind me why I started doing any of this in the first place. Brief as it was, it is genuinely so good to be back. Some orders of business now. As is traditional, I'll be doing a live stream responding to this video's comments on Sunday the 13th, so if you want yours read, better get typing quick, cause it's first come, first serve. I stream on Sundays in general, by the way, just here on YouTube.
How do I actually beat the gay thoughts, by the way? They seemed like really fucking strong and like I had no chance.
You can check the live tab on my channel for VODs if you're interested, all proudly ad-free, unless I get copyright claimed, which I do about half the time. Second, even though you've probably been looking at my Patreon credits scrolling this whole time, I want to give a special thank you to anyone who's continued to support me through the drought of posts this last year. Full-time independent game dev will kinda do that to a guy, and I try to be open in my videos about my projected schedule so people know what projects of mine their pledges are financing, but still, if you stuck around for the 8 months since my last proper video, I'm very lucky to have your support. Speaking of support, you probably watched this video with adblock on, as God intended honestly, but if you did want to throw me a tip, and you're not feeling the whole Patreon thing, consider picking up a copy of my game RAM that I mentioned earlier. Along with me getting money, you'll also get a copy of a pretty damn good roguelike in my opinion. Don't take my word for it though, we just did an official crossover with the Terraria Calamity mod because half their dev team was addicted to our game. If you're watching within about a week of the video going up, it'll still be 20% off on Steam. And with that, I must bid you farewell for now. Thank you for watching, and don't forget, jelly makes me feel weird.